You're listening to The Conversation with Model Mind AI, a weekly check-in with Angela Schultz and Loren Horsager on how to lead through change, stay curious, and get AI ready.
Welcome back to The Conversation. Recently, Sam Altman said we're headed towards AI systems that can access trillions of tokens of context, every conversation, email, and interaction you've ever had. That kind of memory doesn't just make AI faster, it makes it fundamentally different. It turns AI into a partner that learns you. Whether you're building tools, leading teams, or just trying to stay ahead, this episode will change how you think about what your AI should remember and what it shouldn't. I'm Angela Schultz, and of course, I'm here with Loren Horsager. Welcome, Loren.
Hey, Angela.
Today we're diving into memory. So I have a quick question for you. When I say memory in the context of AI, what are we actually talking about? Like, how is it created? And why is this such a huge talking point in the world of AI?
Yeah, I think it's the most interesting aspect of AI right now, actually, as your Sam Altman quote just kind of alluded to. I think it's really interesting. So memory is this ability for us to use the information we have access to in the AI on a call. And what I mean by that is like one individual chat message or one individual prompt that gets executed via the AI. Now, the problem is, and why this is so interesting, is that we can only fit so much information into an individual call. And what I love about this is not unlike our brains, right? So it's very much a similar process to how our brains work. We actually have a fixed context size that, I can't think about everything at once. I can think about one thing and I can work on that. And then I can switch to something else, but I can't do them all at the same time, right? And I can't fit everything in at once when I'm doing that. So let's just take let's take an example that I get asked all the time. Like, I want to use AI to write a book. Okay, people will come to me and they're like, I have all this content, I just need to write the book, right? And one of the challenges with that is you have all this content. Maybe you have thousands of podcast, transcripts or documents that you've written, or things like that that you want to create a book out of. Well, the problem is if you look at we'll take Grok. We don't talk about Grok that much. Grok actually has a very, very large context window, and the context window is how much information we can cram into it with our prompt in order to get a response for one call, right? And so it's a fixed amount. And in Grok's case, it's actually very, very large compared to a lot of them. And this is a number that has gone up probably about 10x in the last 12 to 18 months or so. So this is getting bigger, but it's still very, very limiting on how much we can cram in there. So this is why even if you upload, like, let's say you upload a book and you want to summarize it, it doesn't do a very good job because the whole book is not in memory for every call as it's doing that. So we have to use memory as a way for us to actually process these AI calls, because the AI is actually working pretty well. The problem is what we're loading with it from our memory, from our information that's getting put up there, and memory is one of the components of that, including over time as we're learning and expanding on that. Does that make sense?
It does. I mean, to me, as a user, it saves me so much time, right? The efficiency of it, because it remembers X, Y, and Z, I'm able to work so much quicker than I would if I had to build that context or that memory every time. I will say every once in a while, I'll feel it drifting a bit. But if I simply use natural language and say, oh, remember, this is what the focus of the task is, or this is what the context is, or I want you to use this document, it is pretty quick to realign. And then I'm back hitting the ground running with that memory connection.
So how about this? You're training on this all the time. How about you give us just a little bit of an overview on, because we talk about this in ChatGPT a lot, and it has a memory feature. Most tools, most AIs now have this memory feature to some degree, and we're going to get a little bit more detailed into what this means and why it works and why it doesn't work sometimes. But can you just tell us, like, just so people understand where it is and how to get to this, how to see this in chat, just so they understand kind of what that means, and then what's going into that, and what does that
Yeah.
mean for your output?
So there's kind of two ways we look at it. One is just the more you use it, the more it learns about you and your style of work. So I have people who have come in and haven't used ChatGPT before, and there's not a lot there to work with. And then there's people who are using it daily. So we run a prompt like, if I were a car, what kind of car would I be? Just to test the memory. And the people who use it every day, it's spectacular how personalized the response is, and they get a kick out of it. If they're a new user, they may not have a lot of context to pull from, so it's a little more generic. So what we do then is we expedite the process by, in settings, you can go in and you can actually customize. They call it customize instructions. So we can add some content there, like what they do for a living, where they live. So if they're prompting off of where should I go to dinner tonight, it'll have that context about them built in. But then there's also an opportunity to manage memory where you can go in and pick and choose what memories are kind of your core memories, which can really help personalize and align, because that's our goal. Anytime you can kind of, it's almost like hiring that employee that you've had for 10 years. They know how you operate, how you communicate, and it just makes things work seamlessly. So it's almost bringing all of that background knowledge and context awareness just right up front, put it in, and then start running.
So I have another question for you then. So, and again, this is you're the expert on this part. So, in ChatGPT, there's the ability to do a temporary chat. Tell me about that and how that impacts memory. Does that save to memory, or it just doesn't use memory?
No, it doesn't save to memory at all. It's a blank slate. And in class, I teach it as a way to kind of keep your user interface cleaned up as well, because we use so many chats throughout the day. Some of them are important and you want to save into a project. Others are just one prompt and done. So we actually encourage people to use the temporary chat when they're doing web searches or personal prompts, because oftentimes then it doesn't muddy the water as well, but it also keeps your user interface clean for those of you who like to organize. So I didn't use temporary chats when it first came out, and now I'm using it probably a third of the time. I also like kind of a new take or a new perspective, because my memory is so locked into me and what I like. Sometimes I want an alternative perspective, and then I'll tap into the temporary chat. So that's how we're using it in class, and just some quick ideas. But I know also people like to share their ChatGPT accounts, and they don't want their memory to get muddied
Yeah.
between people. So they'll make the extra person only use temporary chat. So it has a clean memory of the singular person, which is kind of a fun way to look at it as well.
So let's build off that. So this is, we have this experience of chatting with it and understanding that if we put something in there, it's going to know that going forward. As an example, I'll be writing lots of like proposals and things like that. And it knows that I work for Model Mind and that, here's the type of things we do. And it's because I've loaded that in previously, right? And I'm not going and I'm not even adding in, like, we have a document that kind of supports if we're creating marketing content or training content or whatever, but that it already knows a lot of that information, and so it's just pulling that in naturally. So and that's the memory effect on there. But let's talk about where else this is important and why it's important to think about this. So I mentioned the writing a book process. So if we're going to do that, we ultimately want automated processes probably to help us do a lot of that writing. And this is where memory, we actually have to think about this, but not so much in technical terms. And this is going to be a fairly non-technical conversation today. This is meant for business leaders to think about these processes. So we want to keep it pretty non-technical, but the great thing is it's very much like a human perspective on what do I need as a person to make this decision? And the same thing applies to the AI. But now it's not, writing a book is not a decision. It's maybe 1,000 or 10,000 decisions, and it's a continuous editing and refining process, right? Well,
Mhm.
we also can't keep the whole book that we've written or all the content we have to produce the book in memory at a time. So we have to go through and keep querying this. So we have some different methods to do that. So one of the tools we have, and again, we're not going to get into the technicals of this, but it is called RAG, and you'll see this out there if you go out to YouTube. RAG is a big deal, and now there's all sorts of variations on top of it, which are really exciting, actually. But RAG stands for Retrieval Augmented Generation. What that means is if we're going to take a set of data, like let's say we're uploading a document or a bunch of documents that are going to support our book writing process, as an example. Well, essentially, we're going to break those down into small chunks, and then we're going to use the AI to actually process them. And then when we go make a call and we say, "Hey, I want to summarize, our thoughts on this topic from this book," well, what's going to happen is it's going to go search this database that got created of our memory, so our memory database, and it's going to find the most relative chunks that can actually support that, right? And
Mhm.
so we're going to say, hey, we want the 10 most relevant chunks out of that, or the 1,000 most relevant, whatever it is, and it depends on our context size and all these and things we're doing. But some amount of content's going to come back. Now, what we've learned is RAG is really, really powerful in small situations. And what we see a lot with AI solutions is now we roll that out to production and it scales and it completely doesn't work. And I think it's really interesting because what happens, and this makes sense if you think about it. So if we have a document that has 1,000 of these chunks and we want 10 chunks out of it, the closest chunks are going to be very, very specific to this topic. But now we've talked about this, I believe, on the program before. Let's say we have a help desk solution that's doing the same thing. Well, let's say we're looking for, my password isn't working, and so how do I respond to that as a help desk support tool? Well, the problem is, as we have more and more content, the 10 things or however many that are coming back are now so fine that they're all just telling us the problem. They're not getting to the solution, or they're not getting us to the options of solutions that there are to this problem. So as we add content to it, it actually makes our system weaker, which is pretty interesting. And it's something we have to think about. This is why when we're working with clients building things, we really want content in our system once. So we really try to avoid duplicates of content because we have too much of it, and now it can't decipher how to get out beyond that to actually provide good information. But there's some cool things, and we're going to get into them about how the technology world is actually solving for this problem, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But that's really what we're trying to do, is figure out what content needs to go as part of every prompt that we're sending in order to get the right output, right? So we need a good prompt, we need good instructions, but we also need the right information to get sent with that.
And on a smaller scale, we also do this in class when we build out our custom GPTs. It's a similar scenario where we want to make sure that our knowledge that we're including is very clean, right?
Mhm.
And so we call it in class, we call it building the brain. And that's our instructions for the GPT along with the content that we upload to kind of build out that go-to experience that we're hoping the GPT responds to first before it reaches out into its other memories. Would that be a true connection or use of memory, or is that more of a pure
Yeah.
instruction based?
No, that is still use of memory. So
Okay.
anytime like you go to ChatGPT or Copilot and you upload a file, what's actually happening behind the scenes is it's doing a RAG process on that.
Yeah.
So it's getting parsed apart, chunked up, and then those chunks are used because it can't fit all that in the context at one time, right? So
Yeah.
if we look at like what does the context mean? So I think you referred to this, but in 2022, the context was 40,996 tokens.
Right.
That's about 3 pages of text.
Yeah.
And now GPT 4.0 is 128,000 tokens. So we've come a long way in how much we can include, right? Which is fantastic. But what has to be included in each one of those prompts? It's not just our memory, it's also the history of the chat that we're having. It's our prompt gets included in that. So our instructions get included. So it's all this stuff gets included. So we can fill that up pretty quickly still. If we're looking at, we want to write a book, for example.
Sure.
Or here's the other thing that we're working on with some groups right now, which I think is really interesting opportunity. So we're working on some agents, like a CFO agent, right? So the goal is, how can we take in on a weekly or monthly basis, or I mean, you could go do this daily if you want in the future, but what might have happened quarterly before is now probably going to happen weekly. And it's like, how do we process our financials to understand where we're at and make better decisions as leaders, right? And so what's interesting about that, first of all, these are big sets of data. So how are you getting these reports? Which leads to another problem, which is if people are like, hey, I want to run AI on my database. Well, that's a really interesting problem as well, because a database is massive generally. And so you have 1 billion records in your database. How are you going to pull that into a system? It's not as simplistic as it sounds. And there's some solutions coming out to make that better. Basically, what we want to do in general right now, the approach is, we want to provide a report out of the database, which the AI can help us query to pull that report.
Sure.
And then we pass that report in. So it's already summarized or shrunk down to some degree in some way, depending on what we're looking for and looking to do. But so back to the CFO thing, we can actually take all this content and upload it. And so that's all going in memory. That's part of our memory, is that, hey, let's say we're going to do this every week and we're going to run our financials every week. And we are actually putting that into our memory. But now what's interesting about this, we also want to capture, let's say we're looking at, hey, we had a budget, for this quarter or this month, and we're off. Why are we off? Well, we might go through and use the AI to help us determine why we're off. It's like, hey, we hired a couple more people, so we spent more money, and we had some client changes and things, and that impacted some things. Well, what's really useful, and this is where memory gets really exciting, is we can now tell the AI that, and it didn't help us really figure this out in this point in time, but going forward, that's in the memory now, and it knows that these are the changes, and it's going to come back and ask us in the future, hey, here's your budget, here's where you're at. Why are these off? Here's some things that we see so far based on other data. Does this make sense? And it can actually help you as you're having conversations with it, because it has more and more memory over time to understand your business better. So it's not just the data, it's the analytics around the data that you're working hand in hand with the AI on.
All I can picture is an Excel spreadsheet, which is a great tool, right, to calculate all these things. But an Excel spreadsheet doesn't have memory. It doesn't know your past strategies or decisions or changes. So the idea of having this kind of Excel spreadsheet come to life and not only be able to do the calculations as a tool, but also to have this memory of your business decisions and be able to then apply that for good strategy in the future, that's pretty incredible.
Right.
Yeah, I love that idea. And I keep coming back to, I can't wait to get my first agent. So I know you're building this for somebody else, but someday I'm going to have my own. So
you are. You already have a few, you just don't realize it. But there's going to be more impressive agents coming very, very soon. There's a lot of things happening there. We're going to talk more about it soon too.
Yes. Okay, so that leads me to one question regarding governance. So how should leaders approach memory governance, especially in regulated? You're mentioning a CFO where you're dumping in all this financial information. Is there a red flag moment when it comes to memory use, or what are some of the cautionary tales regarding governance?
This is a good question. So, and this is why I think when people do their AI governance, they're going into this somewhat blind usually. And so that's not necessarily terrible to start with, because you got to put something together. But as you start to get deeper into this, and this is why we run our training classes, right? We want people to continue to move deeper and deeper in this, because of the potential but also the need to understand the risks associated with this. So let's look at the risks. Let's take the CFO agent as an example. So we're loading all of our information in there. So obviously we want to make sure that we're paying for our large language model system because that is critical. We don't want to be sharing all of our data with other people. But now in this case, we also need to figure out where we're going to store it. Like we can choose different tools for our memory. When we're looking at automated processes, when we're looking at agents, we can plug different memory systems into these tools. So it's up to us to manage that and manage where our information is, just like a normal technical project, right?
Mhm.
So that's one thing. Now, the other part of this is how do you make sure you don't have data leakage between, like, let's say you're looking at different clients' information. Maybe you're in a healthcare system
Mhm.
and you're using AI and I'm looking at patient one versus patient two. That memory can't be shared, right? So
Mhm.
I have to have a separate memory for each patient, and then it's
Mm.
running in that context. And there are
Yes.
tools out there that support this now, including what's really exciting is there's some tools out there now that will actually allow you to basically hook in as you're updating a database, you can take the record data for that specific patient and update that patient's data, that patient's
Mhm.
memory. So now, as you're using the AI to have a conversation with it, you can actually get patient-specific information. Now, there's all sorts of HIPAA rules and stuff around this specific to this, but everybody understands that that's a big concern, right? I don't want to see
Right.
someone else's patient information if I go out to my patient record, right?
Right.
So, but that's what the tools are catching up where memory is not shared like it is in a ChatGPT scenario where and it's in that case, it's not shared. It's all just you, but it's
Right.
still everything you're doing, right?
Right.
Now, when we think about agents or workflows, we're working on one context at a time, and that's where we need to make sure our memory is also designed to work on that one context at a time and have different memory for each context that we're working in.
Okay, that is really interesting because without knowing this, I actually utilize this same thinking when I build out projects in ChatGPT because I was
Mhm.
having trouble with it kind of crossing the line in different projects I was working on and muddying the waters. So I would build a project where I could
Mhm.
set the tone, the instructions, I could build out that persona, how I wanted it to respond and build in those constraints as well. Like I only want this to be the focus of this project. And it allows me to work within that context so I can jump from project to project without have to resetting the tone or resetting my audience or whatever it may be. So in a small scale, I'm doing that on a different level where I'm kind of building boundaries around different tasks and project for that same idea of memory.
Yeah. Now, if you want to think forward a little bit, here's what's really exciting. So let's take your job as a curriculum development and training person. Uh, so let's say you have some agents, right? And you have an agent that is your curriculum development, curriculum designer expert, right? That helps
Mhm.
you create course outlines and stuff. But then you're going to have a script writer that's helping write scripts. You're going to have, a slide generator that's going to help you create the interactions you need, and maybe handouts, things like that. So all these different agents that will do different parts of this process.
Mhm.
What's interesting is we can take that same project memory approach and apply it to agents where they'll each have their own memory, but they can
Mhm.
have a shared project memory to say, hey, we're creating this class. We all have access to the project folder for this class, and we can all use that memory as part of our memory when we're working on that project, right? Now, if I
Yeah.
switch gears to a different project, this agent switches gears, it's going to be working in a whole different context with a different project, but it can actually have that project mindset when it's working on content. So that
Yeah.
is really really cool, and it's fun to see in real life. Um, we're playing with that and working
Right.
with this, but it's not the tools aren't out there very easily to do this yet. But we're lots of people are working on that, and it's going to be exciting in the next few months.
So then I know there's a lot of talk right now about data management. Is that also a strategy? Is memory management?
Yeah. When we get to agents in the next, over the next 6 months, memory management is going to be a critical aspect of this, and understanding memory and understanding the current state of memory. So let's just take an example. In IT, we always want to be able to replicate something and be able to go back and test it, right?
Yeah.
And what's interesting is how can we test something if the memory is changing on us every call and it's learning and updating, which causes some issues. So we have to have versioning control in place to do things like that because our memory is changing. But all these things are going to be critical to think about how we're managing memory, just like how we're managing data, how we're securing that, how we're making sure that our memory changes context correctly to what it should have access, what that agent should have access to at that time. The other point to think about here is that, why are we talking about memory now? There's lots of interesting points about this, but is this impacting most people today as they're using their platform? Only a little bit from like what ChatGPT or some of these other tools are memorizing mostly for us, right? But what we're trying to do is like we want people set up for the future on how to think about this. So it's critical to start these conversations. It is not unlike this is not a very technical conversation in the sense that it's not unlike how a human brain works. I guess that's technical, but we can all think about that, right? Like that everybody can comprehend that to some degree and how we interact with that. So we have to start down this path of learning and understanding because this is going to be critical as we're thinking about why did my agents not work right? Well, a lot of times it's going to be because the memory process or the memories that were there were not correct. So we need to be able to understand, and we need to understand how to test for that and stuff. So that's why we're having this conversation today, is because memories really will impact us going forward very soon here. They impact us some on workflows, but generally our workflows are a little bit more constrained. But they will still impact that some. But on agents, they're going to be incredibly powerful and incredibly important as to what works and what doesn't work.
Hmm. I heard you use the word test several times. And so that lends really well into the prompt of the week, where we're going to start playing around, even just using your ChatGPT account or your Copilot account. We can play around a little bit with memory and engage with ChatGPT in testing your memory, training it, and then also being able to tidy it up. So here's the prompt of the week, where we kind of explore how memory shapes your AI experience. Because I think one thing I've noticed is it's less reactionary and more proactive, in the sense of it knows preferences and whatnot, and so it really leans into where I'm going, and just I love everything about it. Except for I do have one complaint. I did have to bake into my memory for ChatGPT to not use so many emojis, and I've heard other people share that same request going forward. So here we go. It's threefold. So I want you to ask your ChatGPT account 3 questions, and I would actually do this in kind of a fun, creative way. You can say, based on what you know about me, what would you recommend I focus on this week? So that's a little bit of a test just to see what memory it already has and how your response is going to reflect on you. We do this one in class where we'll say, if I was a car, what car would I be? And then it usually pulls out a couple memories that it can align to and create that analogy. Now, second, I want you to work on training your memory. So ask a prompt like this: how can I train you better to align with my goals, preferences, and communication styles? Now, I mentioned it earlier that you can go in and set some custom instructions, but ChatGPT also allows you to manage some of your memories. So after you test it and train it, then you can go in and actually tidy up. So I am a trainer and I work with a lot of different companies from a lot of different roles in the industries. And oftentimes my memory will need some cleaning up because I'll do some mock examples. And so I'll go in and manage my memory. So this last piece just says, review what's in your memory. What would you recommend keeping, updating, and forgetting? So it's more of a maintenance of your memory. It's not something I do every day, but probably once a month I'll go in and see what it's got locked in as some of my memories. And I can tidy them up. So let's see, going forward, just be mindful of not only how much memory is shaping your experience, but I also think it opens the doors to what's possible with AI, is knowing that it has a memory and it can access your past conversations and your past experiences can be really, really powerful. So, and then just to wrap up the prompt of the week, you can also ask it to forget, right? Now we've got temporary chat, which is a natural way for you to just be able to explore without memory. But if you are in the regular version, you can just simply say, forget that I was experimenting with a different tone last week. Let's go back to my preferred tone of choice. So fun to play with memory, but also appreciate it in your user experience. Going forward, memory is the foundation of really long-term intelligence, and it's what allows AI to evolve with you. So as we've seen today, it's already shaping how we communicate, how customers are using it, and how leaders are making decisions going forward. Any last thoughts on memory, Loren?
I need to try your, what kind of car am I? Because I'm afraid, I want to be what, McLaren or Ferrari or whatever, but I'm
Sure,
probably
sure.
like a mint condition Yugo or something.
I
So,
was just gonna
well,
guess Yugo. A Yugo
I'm
or a
curious what
Pinto
people
or
come up with in
something.
class. So, but I'll have to try that. It's fun to hear what other people have come up with. So, it's exactly right. Like the reason we're talking about this is it's probably not that big a deal to most people today, but it's something that we need. Like our goal is to continue getting people to go down this path because what's coming is going to be very important about how you apply memory, how you understand memory. And again, we don't have to technically understand all the aspects, but you have to understand it from like a humanistic perspective, and what is needed in order to make this decision or create this artifact as the AI is running. And so we really have to have a handle on memory. It's probably the most crucial aspect of what's happening in AI. It is by far the most interesting research out there. If you're looking at research papers on AI, there every week there are massive research papers about memory, and they're fascinating to read because there's so many aspects to it, and a little improvement can go a long way into solving some problems. But then it usually opens up another set of issues depending on how it scales or personalization, all those kind of things. So it's
Mhm.
fascinating. Hopefully this was beneficial to people to understand a little bit more about how this works, and why we need to think about it. And yeah, we're looking forward to this. Always comes up after our classes. So when we go through class, people want to talk about memory because they start to see the value and why this is such an important topic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it really is powerful. It kind of reminds me of there's a quote about history repeating itself, and it says, history doesn't repeat itself, but it does rhyme. But I think it lends itself to the idea of we have to remember our past choices and our past experiences to move forward and progress and grow. And so by having that memory component, it just amps up everything you do and
Mhm.
is such a good strategy partner going forward. But well, fantastic. So here's your final question. What do you want your AI to remember? The answer might be the next competitive edge for your business. So keep that in mind. Let's keep building, and feel free to visit us at modelmind.ai. And as always, keep the conversation going. And thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Thanks for being part of the conversation with Model Mind AI. Until next time, keep leading, keep learning, and stay curious.